Today's lesson is on section 3.7, solving percent problems. And just as it says there, percent problems are any problems that deal with some kind of percentage in it, like maybe trying to find 20% of a certain number. Or maybe even we're trying to find the percent for our answer, where it's like, what percent is 35 out of 50? So any problem that kind of deals with a percentage where it could be our answer, or maybe it's just in the problem. There's a few ways you can set up these types of problems to find the percent or find the percentage of the number you're looking for. We just recently worked with proportions, so I'm going to show us how we can solve these problems using the proportion method, or solving with a proportion today. So there's another way you can solve too, and we'll talk about that in the next lesson, but today I'm going to talk about how we can solve it using a proportion. As it says here, you may have seen problems like this before, probably in 6th or 7th grade. This one says, for example, could say something like this: 15% of what number is 45. So we're trying to find out 15% of some number, whatever that number is. 15% of it gives us 45 for the answer. So we're trying to find out what that bigger number is going to be. Sometimes the problem is like this. Sometimes the 45 is maybe what we're trying to find out, this number at the end. They may say 15% of, and they might give us a number here, and then this is what we're trying to figure out at the end, instead of giving us the 45. So just different types of problems they can kind of switch around on us, but either way, dealing with a percentage, or maybe even sometimes trying to find the percent. I like to write down, or just kind of something important to note in this section, is that I will talk about 2 ways we can solve these. And again, the way I'm going to talk about today is actually this first way, though, solving with a proportion. So you can even think of this like method number 1, and then I'll talk about method number 2 tomorrow. So you don't have to worry about this one right now, but today we're going to talk about method number 1, how to set these up with a proportion to solve. Setting up a proportion, remember what that looks like. It's 2 ratios that are equal to each other. If I'm dealing with a percent problem, first of all, remember that the word percent, it actually means out of 100. The word percent is talking about out of 100. And what do you know, in my problem here, if I'm solving these using a percent, if I'm solving a percent problem using a proportion, notice that the number 100 is actually in one of my fractions. It's always going to be in the denominator of one of the ratios. The P, and I'll actually reveal what all A, B, and P stand for. Here's what you should jot down for each one of these. The P, though, as I'm talking about right now, P actually stands for whatever the percent is. Again, percent means out of 100, so it makes sense that this second ratio here I have, P over 100, it's saying how much it is out of 100. 80% is like 80 out of 100. If you wrote it as a fraction, that's one way you could represent it. 25% would be 25 out of 100. So it makes sense that the P goes over the 100 whenever we're dealing with these kind of problems. The other ratio is kind of a relationship between the other numbers that we're going to be talking about, A and B. And I'll kind of maybe even put these in blue here, but this is my other ratio, A and B. It says A equals part and B equals the base or the whole number. I've heard each of those terms. So part means it's like part of the number that we're talking about. So again, it's usually, and I guess you can have something that's over 100%, but it's usually a number that's smaller than the whole, more often than not. Not every time, but more often than not. For example, and the whole is like our base number or our total amount. One example is like maybe passes in football. You could complete 3 out of 5 passes. Well, in this particular case then, the part would be 3, because again, that's not our total amount, that's how many we've completed, out of a total of, our whole amount is 5 in this case. So the part would be 3, the base would be 5. And if I was setting up some proportion to solve and see what percentage that would be of completing passes, I would say 3 out of 5 equals, well, P over 100, because that's what I'm trying to find, the percent, what that is out of 100. So I just kind of made up that example on the spot, but there's just kind of showing what it means by the number that's the part. Again, that's the one that's obviously typically not the biggest number. It's saying it's out of however many we're talking about there for B, the base. That's another way I also describe how to find the base of the whole number. And I think I have it on the next page here, but the base of the whole number is usually how many it's out of. And so that's kind of a key word we'll notice in these problems very often is the word of. When you see this word, usually the number right after it, that's going to be our base in the problem. That'll be our base number. Okay. So that's kind of one way we can find out which number is the part and which number is the base. Well, the word of is kind of a key word. Usually the number right after the word of will be the base for our problem. But I think I talk about this in the next page, so we'll move along here. So on that previous page, I talked about, well, the three different kind of variables we'll have to fill in when we're making some proportion to solve a percent problem. We need to know the part, the whole, and the percentage. Well, again, how do we know which number is the whole and which number is the part? Well, here are some hints that I've kind of put together that may help you figure out, well, which number goes where in my proportion. And I know this is in yellow, not red, but I definitely want you to copy that down too. That's kind of our little ratio that's going to help us with these percent problems. So here are my hints. Copy these down as well. Here are my hints to help you find out what number goes where in that proportion. The percent, for number one here, the percent will either be in the problem, like it'll say 20% or 75% or whatever it may be. It'll say that percent, or that'll be what we're trying to find, or that'll be our unknown. So either it will be in the problem, or that's going to be our unknown. That's going to be the variable for what we're trying to find for our answer. Number two, the number directly after the word of will be our base or our whole number. Again, think about that example I made up on the previous page. When a quarterback throws passes, he makes, let's say he completes 3 out of 5. So the word after the word of was the number 5. That's going to be the base. That's the number we're comparing the part to, the base or the total amount. So that's going to be our B. That's going to be our base in the problem typically. But also in these problems, that'll be an easier way to find it. Usually the word after, or the number after the word of, that'll be the base or the whole number. And the third tip there, or the third hint, I guess, is just kind of whatever number left over will be the part. And I say give these kind of hints and say it like this because they often rearrange these different types of problems. And even in a word problem, you never know when they're going to talk about what particular thing. They may mention the percent right at the beginning of the problem. They may mention the percent at the end. You're never quite sure where they're going to mention all these numbers, and they can rearrange the problem in many different ways. So in terms of when you're looking for the key parts, these are kind of my 3 hints that can help you. Either you can find the percent, or you can find the base, and then the part is usually kind of the leftover one, wherever that may be in the problem. So let's look at this first example here and try to set one of these up together. It says, what percent of 25 is 17? What percent, so we're trying to find what percentage in this case, of 25 is 17. Well, again, following my hints from up here, looking at number 1, it says the percent will either be in the problem or that's our unknown. In this case, it says what percent. So this is what we're trying to find out. We're trying to find out what P is. So if I'm going to make this proportion, it's going to be P over 100. That's what I'm trying to find in this problem. The rest of my information, it says what percent of 25 is 17. Again, in terms of determining, as I have up here in this big question, which number is the whole and which number is the part. Again, sometimes they can rearrange this in a couple different ways, but in this case it says what percent of 25 is 17. So of 25, the number right after the word of is 25. So that's kind of telling you that's the number they're comparing everything to. That's the base number. That's the total, the whole number. And then the last one left over there is 17. So that must be my part. So here's how this proportion would set up. When I saw one of these proportions, again, we talked about cross multiplying. There's a few ways you could do it. You could also use common multiplier for this one, but we'll just use cross multiplying since we've been comfortable with that for a little bit now. P times 25 is just going to give me 25P. And then 17 times 100 will just give me 1700. So again, what I'm really doing when I'm cross multiplying is making a new equation. There's my equation. Now the left side is 25P. The right side is 1700. And if I just take 1700 divided by 25, I'm going to get P equals 68. Since this problem is looking for a percent, I should put 68% as my answer. And the nice thing about using a proportion that I'll talk about, where as opposed to the other method I'll teach in the next lesson, is when I found the answer 68 there, that just is the percentage right there. I don't have to change the decimal or change it to a different form. Whatever I get for the answer for P, that is the percentage. There it is right there. I can put 68% and my answer is done. I don't have to change it to a different, move the decimal or do anything different. As I'll talk about in the other lesson, with the other method I will have to do that sometimes. Going through another example. So we'll call this example number 2 here. 75 is 62.5% of what number? Again, using my hints from above, again, these will kind of help us to set up one of these problems. Hint number 1 said the percent will either be in the problem or it's our unknown. In this particular problem, the percent is right there, 62.5%. So I can pick that information off right away, and that's going to be going for P in my proportion. So in this case, it's just 62.5. The percent's always over 100, so 62.5 out of 100. Then for the rest of the information, now I got to figure out which number is the part and which number is the whole, and then again, one of those will be my variable in this particular problem. Well, as I look at this problem, I notice that I only have one other number to deal with, 75, and then again, my other number will be my variable. That's what I'm trying to find out. As I look at my hints, hint number 2 says the number directly after the word of will be our base, or that'll be our whole number, our total. Well, in this case, here's the word of, and right after that, it says what number. So again, that's kind of my hint. In this case, that's what I'm trying to find, what number. That's my variable. So my other proportion, the word after of is what number, that's my unknown. So that's my B. And then my leftover number, in this case, for the hint number 3, says the leftover number is the part. So in this case, it's 75. Again, they can arrange these in a bunch of different ways. So I think that's, again, this is why I tell you these are the 3 hints to kind of follow, or even in that order to set these up for you. But this will get us to a correct setup, and then I can solve it from here. 100 times 75 just gives me 7,500. 62.5 times B is just going to give me, I mean, I kind of ran out of room here, so I'm going to move my equation actually. So 100 times 75 gives me 7,500. 62.5 times B will just give me 62.5 B. And then I'm just going to divide both sides by 62.5. I don't happen to know that one off the top of my head, but I do have a calculator right here to help myself out. So 7,500 divided by 62.5 just gives me 120. So B equals 120. We'll go through just a few more examples here and set them up together just to make sure we have the idea of how we set up one of these percent problems with a proportion. And I've got, again, my little yellow setup over here, my proportion off to the side here. Keep an eye on that. So we're trying to figure out what P, A, and B are and which one's the unknown. In problem 2 here, it says what percent of 56 is 49. Again, the first thing I would look for is there a percent in the problem? No, it just says what percent. So this is what we're trying to find. So P is the unknown, so P over 100 is how I'll start this proportion. And again, do notice that I'm usually starting with this because that was kind of my first hint, but I'm putting it on, I guess you could say, the left side of the equation. Obviously, notice it does not matter which side you put A and B on and which side you put P over 100 on. So you could write this as P over 100 equals A over B. That's the same thing. So it actually doesn't matter which side they go on. As long as you have one on one side, one on the other, equal sign in between them, it just means they're both equal. So it doesn't matter which one I start with. I just happen to start with the percent because I think that's usually the easiest to find. Either it's in the problem or it'll say what percent in these types of problems. So P over 100 equals, in this case, again, looking at my other hints, the word after of was the base. So in this case, after of is 56. So that's my number in the base. And on the top, I have 49. So 49 over 56 equals P over 100. Again, in one like this, I'd probably cross multiply. I'd get 56P equals 4,900. And again, this one, I would divide both sides by 56. So 4,900 divided by 56 gives me 87.5. So, and again, a nice thing with the proportion method. This is one big benefit I like about it. If you get 87.5 in your calculator, then you just stick a percent sign after it. That is the answer, 87.5%. You don't have to change the decimal or anything. That's the answer right there. So, next one here, it says number 3. 72% of what number is 180? I'm going to bring my little yellow helper down here in a second, my little yellow help to set up a proportion. In this case, my percent is 72. So I'm going to start this problem off. I'm just going to put 72 over 100. That equals, again, the number after the word of is usually my base. In this case, it says of what number. So that's what I'm trying to find out is the base. So in this case, B is my unknown. And my leftover number is 180, so that must be the part. That's the only place it could go in my proportion. So there's my setup for this particular problem. Cross multiply. 72B equals 18 and then 2 more zeros. So oops, oh, not 18,000. Sorry, comma's in the wrong spot there. 18,000. And then 18,000 divided by 72 I divide by 72 on both sides, I get 250. So 250b equals, my base is 250. That last problem up here says what number is 30% of 90? In this last example, again, I have my percentage, 30%. So 30 out of 100. So I know that. The number after the word of is usually my base in these kind of problems. So the number after of is 90 in this case. So 90 is my base. So that goes on the bottom. So then what number, I guess this is kind of what I'm trying to find out, what number is 30% of 90? That's my A. That's my part. That's the one I don't know. So that goes on top in this case. 100 times A just gives me 100A. 30 times 90 just gives me 2,700. And if I divide both sides by 100 in this case, I don't need the calculator for this one. 2,700 divided by 100 is just 27. So that's my part. Again, these problems you will see these kind of problems in also like more word type problems as well. But here's kind of the basic form of them in terms of taking just the words and being able to interpret a way we can put it in a proportion and solve it.